The walls are closing in on Benjamin Netanyahu from all sides. At home, furious families of detainees have taken to the streets. Their calls for a ceasefire ringing outside the Prime Minister's residence. And in Tel Aviv, thousands of protesters demanded their loved ones be brought home alive, and not after another bloody siege. The backlash escalated further as detainee families announced plans for a nationwide economic shutdown, urging major companies and key institutions to join their strike against the government's decision to occupy Gaza. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's own coalition is cracking. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich publicly broke ranks, accusing the Prime Minister of hesitation in the war effort and dismissing the Security Cabinet's Gaza City offensive as a half measure. Abroad, the pressure is just as intense. Global allies have condemned Israel's planned takeover of Gaza City, while the UN warns of catastrophic consequences. As the Security Council convenes an emergency session, one reality is undeniable. Netanyahu's grip on his government, his military, and his people is slipping fast. And I'm Salma El-Fiki, and welcome to In Depth. The ongoing protests have struggled to achieve their political aims, with the turnout dwindling and signs of fatigue setting in. Protesters, frustrated by what they describe as a government that does not listen to Israelis, are now exploring alternative forms of action. According to Le Monde, the detainee solidarity movement has reached a critical juncture. Polls show public opinion increasingly prioritizes the return of the detainees above all. But the rallies have yet to yield concrete political outcomes. In response, families of detainees and fallen soldiers have called for a nationwide strike next Sunday, demanding a deal to secure the detainees' release following the Israeli Security Cabinet's decision to expand the military operation in Gaza and occupy the Strip. Some detainee families argue the decision signals the government is giving up on the detainees and have urged leaders of major companies and key institutions to join the strike. In addition, the opposition leader Yair Lapid and other politicians have endorsed the initiative, and Lapid called the strike justified and appropriate, while Democrats leader Yair Golan announced his party's participation on X. And live now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convenes a news conference. Let's see.
He's eating, and he's eating well. The purpose of this news conference is to puncture the lies and spread the truth, but that distortion has been propelled around the earth, almost the way that the Jewish people were maligned in the Middle Ages. Every massacre of the Jewish people was preceded by massive vilification. We were said to be spreading vermin to Christian societies. We were said to be poisoning the wells. We were said to slaughter Christian children for their blood. And as these lies spread around the globe, they were followed by horrific massacres, pogroms, displacements, finally culminating in the worst massacre of them all, the Holocaust. Today, the Jewish state is being maligned in a similar way. Everything that I told you could be verified easily, but it hasn't. And the international press has bought hook, line, and sinker Hamas statistics, Hamas claims, Hamas forgeries, and Hamas photographs. For example, these three children. The first one is Osama al-Raqub. He is in Italy getting treatment because Israel got him out. That's what he looks like today. He has a genetic disease that damages the lungs and digestive system. It makes it hard to absorb nutrients and gain weight. Okay? So Israel facilitated Osama's travel to Italy, where he got the medical aid that transformed his position. The second one is Abdul Qadir. He suffers from a genetic neurological disorder, spinal muscular atrophy, a degenerative condition that causes muscle wasting, weakness, and severe weight loss unrelated to nutrition. This was the real cause of his frail appearance, not starvation. In fact, he was treated in Israel in 2018. Doesn't help because it's a congenital disease and it defies most treatment at least. The third one is the most celebrated one. This is a New York Times cover photo. It's on the front page of Muhammad Zakaria Ayub and his mother. Muhammad Zakaria Ayub is suffering from a genetic illness which you're familiar with. It's called cerebral palsy. His mother is well fed and his brother is healthy. I'm looking right now into the possibility of a governmental suit against the New York Times because this is outrageous. Of course, the correction was postage size. I don't know where it was buried. But this is outrageous. These are the three most celebrated photos, and they're all fake. It's the kind of malignant lies that were leveled at the Jewish people in the Middle Ages. We won't suffer. We won't allow it to go unchallenged, and this is the purpose of this press conference. I hope that you open your eyes to a simple fact. Hamas lies. Now you can ask me any question you want.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Could you give us, please, a timeline when you expect to conclude the new expansion of the new offensive? And if you can give us a few more details about how you're going to provide about this humanitarian surge and how GHF is going to be involved in this. Thank you.
Well, the timeline that we set for the action is fairly quickly. I mean, we want to, first of all, enable safe zones to be established, facilities to be brought to, so the civilian population in Gaza City can move out, as they moved out in Rafah, by the way. You remember in Rafah? There were 1.4 million people. People said they can't, they have nowhere to go and they're not going to move out. It took us, I think, about 8 days or 6 days to move them, and they all moved. There were practically no civilian casualties because they all left. And they went to the Moasi area that I showed you before on the map. We think we can achieve a similar result that safeguards the civilian population, at the same time enables us to go at the last stronghold, the most important stronghold of Hamas, which we haven't done so up to the war. I mean, we've been there, but we haven't taken it as a goal to dismantle the Hamas stronghold there. We do now. I don't want to talk about exact timetables, but we're talking in terms of a fairly short timetable, because we want to bring the war to an end. This is how we bring the war to an end. As far as the surge is concerned, we're talking to the U.S. about additional measures, but we haven't waited, because what we're doing, as I said, is designate safe corridors, allow and expand the GHF distribution points, and we're trying to bring in more resources, hope to recruit some international organizations, maybe, God willing, the UN, if they ever decide to actually do something for the Palestinian people that doesn't go through Hamas. And third, increase the airdrops. The airdrops are important, but they're not the most important thing. The most important thing is ground routes that bring aid, a surge of aid to the Palestinian population as far as we can without letting Hamas loot it.
Second question, yes. Prime Minister, two questions. Firstly, why is Israel not allowing
foreign journalists into Gaza to report independently? And secondly, President Trump has said there is real starvation in Gaza. Do you disagree?
Yeah, on the first question, in fact, we have decided, and I've ordered, directed the military to bring in foreign journalists, more foreign journalists, a lot. There's a problem of assuring security, but I think it can be done in a way that is responsible and careful to preserve your own safety. So the directive has been since, when is it? 2 days ago. From what you're telling me, it hasn't yet been implemented, but it should be, because I think you should see it. And one of the things you're going to see is precisely our efforts to bring in Gazans, to bring in rather food to Gaza. You'll see the trucks that have been entered Gaza and are still waiting to be distributed. You'll see Gazans who are fighting Hamas. You know, we haven't seen it since the beginning of the war. You know, and that's a reflection of the fact that they know that we're approaching the end stage. And these people are, you know, risking their lives and their families, but they say, we can't take it anymore, and they fight back. And the other thing you'll see is physical destruction. And the physical destruction is not because Israel is destroying structures with people in there. That's not what's happening. Israel, in fact, is clearing the population, as in Rafah. But the Hamas terrorists who may stay in those areas booby-trap just about every single building. Not every single building, but a lot of them. And every road, and every street, and every junction, every intersection. So one of the things that we do is we place basically old APC, armored personnel carriers, with tons of explosives, and we detonate them, and they set off all the booby traps. That's why you see the destruction. And we do similar things in the tunnels. The tunnels, these terror tunnels, we put TNT in them, and we detonate that after people have left. But they're under buildings, so the buildings collapse. That's why you see destruction. You see destruction not because we go after civilian populated areas, but in fact areas that have been cleared of civilians and are still rife with terrorists. And that's how we've been able to reduce actually the civilian casualties and increase, of course, the terrorist casualties. I very much appreciate President Trump's support through this entire seven-front war, his magnificent cooperation in the battle to stop the existential threat from Iran, his support throughout, and his support now. He says two things. He says all 20 hostages have to be released, and he says Hamas should not be there. And I think that he, like me, he recognized the fact that there have been deprivations in Gaza caused by Hamas. Hamas has been the cause of that. And what we have to do is overcome it. So we're working together to overcome it.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Is Israel working, proceeding in the belief, in the understanding that it can and will recover all 20 hostages alive militarily? Or is it proceeding in the belief or understanding that conditions of their captivity, Hamas strategy, will make that impossible?
Look, my goal is to get all of the 20 out alive, and also all the ones who are not alive. In the beginning of the war, we were told by a very senior commander, he said, look, we have to get used to the idea that we're not going to see even one of them alive. And I disagreed. I said, we'll get most and possibly all of them if we apply judiciously both military pressure and political, diplomatic pressure. So far, out of 255 hostages, we got 205 out, of which 148 are alive. 148 are alive. We have 20 living ones left in Hamas captivity, and 30 who are not alive, as I said before. If we don't do anything, we're not going to get them out. The option of just doing a war of attrition from defensive positions has not proved itself, and I think it will just it won't get them out, but I think it will draw us into a protracted conflict that doesn't bring the war to an end. The move that I'm talking about, I think, has the possibility of getting them out. We're talking about how to, I don't want to go into details, but how to get the remaining hostages alive as we close in on Hamas. And there are various ways that I think, creative ways, that this can be done. But again, I won't go into that now.
Thank you, Prime Minister. 2 questions, please. You've just shown the horrific photo of Eviatar David, who's kept hostage in Gaza. We know that the hostages' days are numbered. So how will prolonging the war bring them home? And second question, you stated that Gaza would be passed to civilian governance that is not Hamas and not the Palestinian Authority. Can you specifically identify who this civilian governance would be? Do you have any concrete entities or individuals in mind? And is there a timeline for establishing this administration?
Yeah, well, I don't want to prolong the war. I want to end the war. And I think the other suggestions would have prolonged it. We may have gotten maybe a dripping of hostages, even though Hamas showed no willingness to do that. And then they just go on and on and on, and we'd have this endless. Unless you are willing to just say, Israel, capitulate, go out. And even then, I don't think we'll get all the hostages. And if we capitulate, it means that Hamas will rearm, regroup, and carry out all the threats that it openly professes every day, by the way. Every day they say, we're going to do the October 7th massacre again and again, and we're going to destroy the state of Israel. You can't leave them there, So we're not going to do that. So my goal is not to prolong the war. My goal is to end the war. And I think that prolonging the war means that many of them could be starved to death. That's exactly the point. I don't want that. As far as the specific partners for the civil governance of Hamas, we're actually, I think the 5 principles are generally widely accepted. And it's instructive that some of the Arab countries, quite a few of them actually, said that Hamas has to be disarmed. I think this is the starting point. And look at what is happening in Lebanon as a result of our action. The Lebanese government, the new Lebanese government, is talking about disarming Hezbollah. Who would have believed it? Well, some of us did. I did. And that's changing the Middle East, as I promised to do on the second day of the war. I think in this case, if we succeed in this effort to basically end the war by defeating Hamas, its remaining strongholds, there are several candidates. That we're talking about, several constructs. And it's a transitional period. It's a transitional authority. It's going to be there because we don't want to, contrary to, I said we want a security belt, but right next to our border, but we don't want to stay in Gaza. That's not our purpose. At least not my purpose, and I openly state, including to those who disagree with me, and there are some who do. But I think that our goal is to make sure that Hamas isn't there, and that what replaces Hamas does not educate for terrorism, pay for terrorism, launch terrorism, but is willing to live in peace. There are candidates. I don't want to spoil the chances of succeeding here because I think they're real, but they're real providing we finish the job. See, no one's going to go in there if we don't finish the job. We can talk about the day after until eternity. No one's going to go in there unless we finish Hamas, and we're able to finish Hamas, and we will finish Hamas.
Yes, Welt TV Germany. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. So the German Chancellor once again defended his decision not to send weapons to Israel, which can be used in Gaza. He said a friendship can and must withstand that. From your perspective, what has changed in this relationship?
Look, I respect Friedrich Merz. I think he's been a good friend of Israel, but I think he's buckled under. He's buckled under the pressure of false TV reports, the pressure, internal pressure from various groups. And I can say this, and I don't want to talk about him specifically, but I want to say this. Look, maybe some choose to forget October 7th. We will not forget what happened. And we will do whatever it takes to defend our country and defend our people, defend our future. We will win the war, with or without the support of others. But I think that there's an issue here. And the issue is many leaders tell me, look, we know you're right, but we can't stand, in the face of the public opinion in our country, especially European leaders. They tell me that over and over again. And I say, that is your problem. It is not our problem. It is not our problem. you know. In Munich, everybody celebrated Munich. Everybody celebrated the capitulation in Munich, the Munich Peace Conference, peace in our time. Okay, and everybody lambasted Churchill who opposed it. So what? The difference now is maybe they thought then that there was a chance for peace by succumbing to the Nazis. But I don't believe anybody seriously thinks that now. And we're facing neo-Nazis. You know, Chancellor Merz's predecessor was here, okay? And he, on the first or second day of the war, he was there on the first days of the war. And he told me, he said to me, they're exactly like the Nazis. And they are. And we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave the Nazi, the remainder of the Nazi army, you know, in the equivalent of Berlin. You know, don't go into Berlin and don't finish off the Nazi army, the German army. Of course not. I mean, that's what people are telling us to do. And I'm not going to do it. And the Israeli people are not going to do it. We're going to do it. And we have enough criticism within, but the majority of the people, if you really check it, the majority of the people say, that's a result we can't afford if we want to live here. So we're going to do what we need to do. And I hope that Chancellor Merz changes his policy. And you know when he'll change his policy, for sure? When we win.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You talked about the 7-front battle. There's an 8th front, the propaganda war, the information war. Is Israel winning or losing this war? And also, have you spoken with President Trump since the Security Cabinet approved this plan? If so, can you share some of the details of that conversation? If not, do you plan on speaking with him at some point soon? And is he planning to also come to Israel at some point?
Well, I suggest you ask him that. But I haven't spoken to him since next Thursday. Yes, I intend to speak to him very soon. You asked about, sorry, could you repeat the first part of your question?
The first part was about the propaganda.
The propaganda war? Well, look, no, I think that we've not been winning it, to put it mildly. I think there are vast forces that are arrayed against us. Among other things, the algorithms of the social network that are driving a lot of everything else, you know. And people who really know, and they're the foremost people in this field in the world, they're telling me that about 60% of the responses on the social media are bots. They can categorically say they're bots. And they're bots that, you know, especially in America, you know, they want to attack the support that Israel has from the Republican side. So they describe how, you know, themselves as homespun Southerners, except they're riding from Asia somewhere, you know. That's a big issue. We have to contend with it. And we also have to stand up and tell the truth, probably at greater frequency than we're doing now. That's exactly what I'm trying to do now. But again, if you want to win this war, end it speedily. End it speedily. Expose the lies as much as you can. End it speedily, and that's how you win the war. You win the war, the propaganda war, by winning the war and winning the peace. That's the simplest way to do it. And it's about time to do that.
News, UK.
Next question.
Last question.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Given what the IPC says is the unfolding spectre of famine in the Gaza Strip, would you accept that your 11-week blockade, complete blockade on Gaza, played a role in that? And also, given the killings that we have seen at the GHF aid sites, how will you guarantee that that kind of disaster will not happen when you have 1 million more people displaced? Thank you.
Well, number one, the problem that we had was trying to stop Hamas looting. There's no question there was Hamas looting. Everybody saw it. You could see it. Hamas, terrorists taking over and so on. We tried to do two things simultaneously. Stop the trucks and bring in the trucks through the GHF distribution points. Okay. It wasn't successful. And it wasn't successful, among other things, because Hamas interdicted also the GHF program, the distribution point. So Hamas created this problem, and it was directed against us. Immediately, we have a starvation policy, which is completely false, any more than we have a genocide policy, which is equally false. We don't. Not this, not that. I don't know of a country that texts millions of messages to civilians to get out of harm's way, giving up the element of surprise, or calling them individually on cell phones. Yet Israel is accused of genocide. It's absurd. Or starvation policy. But there was a problem of deprivation, no question about it. And so we had to solve it. And the way we solve it is the way I described it to you. And there are now not 0 trucks, but at least in, I think last time I checked, hundreds of trucks that went into Gaza. That's alleviating the situation. Now we want to increase the number of distribution sites. So there's not, basically you answer this problem, or you solve this problem by the law of supply and demand. If you have a lot of supply, if you flood Gaza with food, which some of it will be pilfered, there's no way to get around that, will be looted by Hamas, but you'll have, if enough food reaches the marketplace, so to speak, then you'll see a difference. And you know what the difference is? How do we know for sure there's a difference? Because we monitor, as any one of you could, the price of food in Gaza. It's plummeted. It's plummeted ever since that we decided.
And that was live, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu holding a press conference and denying all allegations of killing and bloodshed and station. And Hamas did everything, forging facts, and they are there to liberate Gaza from Hamas. And now we move again live to the UN Security Council, holding a rare weekend session to discuss Israel's plan to seize Gaza City.
The UN has been unequivocal. The only way to stop the immense human suffering in Gaza is through a full, immediate, and permanent ceasefire. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. Israel must comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law, allowing rapid, safe, unimpeded, and large-scale delivery of humanitarian aid to the population. Civilians, including humanitarian workers and those seeking aid, must be protected. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security. Palestinians must be able to return to their homes. In its 19 July 2024 advisory opinion, the International Court of Justice stated that, and I quote, Israel, as the occupying power, has the obligation not to impede the Palestinian people from exercising its right to self-determination, including its right to an independent and sovereign state over the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory, end of quote. Mr. President, as I emphasized to this Council a few days ago, there is no military solution to the armed conflict in Gaza or the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There will be no sustainable solution without an end to Israel's unlawful occupation and the achievement of a viable two-state solution. Gaza is and must remain an integral part of a Palestinian state. We must plan for Gaza's future as we address the urgency of developments on the ground today. We must establish political and security frameworks that can relieve the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, start early recovery and reconstruction, address the legitimate security concerns of Israelis and Palestinians, and forge a path for the realization of a viable two-state solution. In this regard, I urge the immediate implementation of the political, humanitarian, and security steps outlined in the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution of 29 July 2025. Critically, these frameworks must facilitate a legitimate Palestinian government that can reunify Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, politically, economically, and administratively. This government must represent Palestinians across the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory. A united leadership is crucial to managing post-conflict Gaza and advancing Palestinian self-determination and sovereignty. I urge the Palestinian Authority to advance its stated goal of holding elections. Palestinians have the right to have their voices heard and to be meaningfully included in the process of shaping the future of the State of Palestine. Our ultimate goal remains unchanged: Israel and a fully independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state, of which Gaza is an integral part, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I thank you.
Agradezco. I thank Mr. Yancha for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. The suffering endured in Gaza over the past 22 months has been nothing short of soul-searing. Our shared humanity demands that this unacceptable catastrophe is brought to an immediate end. Mr. President, I will address three matters today. First, I'm extremely concerned over the prolonged conflict, the reports of atrocities and further human toll that is likely to unfold following the government of Israel's decision to expand military operations in Gaza. This marks a grave escalation in the conflict that has already inflicted unimaginable suffering. Now, for over 670 days, Palestinians in Gaza have endured daily killings and injuries. More than 61,000 people have been killed, including over at least 18,000 children, and 151,000 have been injured, according to Gaza's Ministry of Health. Meanwhile, 50 hostages are believed to remain in Gaza, with those still alive held in inhumane and appalling conditions. Thousands of Palestinians, including women and children, remain in Israeli detention, many held without charge or trial, all the required safeguards. A grim milestone has also been crossed in our sector, the humanitarian community. Over 500 humanitarian workers have been killed in Gaza since hostilities escalated, including at least 167 women. Smear campaigns against aid operations continue unabated. And as we approach World Humanitarian Day, we must insist on the protection of all aid workers. Mr. President, second, humanitarian conditions are beyond horrific. We have frankly run out of words to describe it. Whatever lifelines remain are collapsing under the weight of sustained hostilities, forced displacement, and insufficient levels of life-saving aid. Hunger-related deaths are rising, especially among children, with severe malnutrition. Since the escalation of hostilities in October 2023, the health authorities in Gaza have documented the deaths of 98 children from severe acute malnutrition, 37 alone since the 1st of July, just over a month ago. This is no longer a looming hunger crisis. This is starvation, pure and simple. Each day brings harrowing images of women, men, and children killed and injured while desperately seeking assistance. The situation is untenable, especially for older people, people with disabilities, and children without parental care, and widowed women. Gaza lies in ruins. Almost everyone in Gaza has been forcibly displaced at some point over the past 2 years, and at least once. Palestinians in Gaza have been forced into an area that amounts to less than 14% of the territory, in areas that are not safe and are lacking basic services or shelter. Further, expansion of military operations will make these conditions even worse. Families in Gaza living in insecure and overcrowded conditions, many without shelter. 11% of some 6,500 households surveyed recently by humanitarian partners were reported to be living out in the open. No organization, UN or otherwise, has been able to bring shelter supplies into Gaza since the 2nd of March. The lack of adequate shelter is particularly worrisome as we know that winter will soon be upon us. Given the scale of repeated displacement and current living conditions, preventing the entry of emergency shelter supplies defies the obligation to allow humanitarian relief for the population in need. The humanitarian system is effectively collapsed, hospitals are not protected, doctors have been killed or detained, and facilities are working without sufficient medical supplies. Water and sanitation infrastructure, already at a critical failing point before the crisis, are now almost completely failing, and social cohesion is unraveling. So how are the people in Gaza expected to survive in these conditions? Mr. President, my third point, the recent military tactical pauses have enabled some positive changes in humanitarian operations. Limited amounts of fuel have been allowed in, and on 5 August, Israeli authorities approved a mechanism for the gradual resumption of controlled commercial goods into Gaza. This has resulted in different types of food returning to markets and a slight decrease in some prices. Our teams on the ground caution us that despite these developments, meaningful change for the population remains elusive, as humanitarian conditions remain largely unchanged. Security conditions have remained volatile, fighting has continued, crossing arrangements have remained inadequate. Humanitarian missions, though less frequently denied outright, can still take over 18 hours, with teams stranded on dangerous roads. Extreme desperation is driving people to take the humanitarian aid in transit, but this need not be the case. We've seen that when assistance is rapidly and significantly scaled up, incidents of looting and insecurity decline, and trust begins to be rebuilt. The United Nations has the plan and the systems in place to respond. We've said this before, and we will say it again and again. Let us work. To assist all those in need at scale, we must have predictable access, and the movement of life-saving goods must be more effectively facilitated. It is equally critical that all humanitarian partners on the ground, including international humanitarian organizations, are allowed to deliver life-saving services. Registration processes for non-governmental organizations that the government of Israel introduced earlier this year are concerning and risk further undermining operational capacity and continuity. Mr. President, echoing the Secretary General, I remain deeply concerned about the ripple effects of the expansion of Gaza military operations on the West Bank, where military operations, settler violence, and home demolitions persist at unprecedented and alarming rates. A year ago, the International Court of Justice determined that Israel must bring its unlawful presence, policies, and practices to an end as rapidly as possible. Developments in the West Bank worsen and an existing humanitarian situation that sadly remains less visible, but not because it is less severe, but because the global attention has been drawn elsewhere. Mr. President, Security Council members, and indeed the international community listening, states and all those with any influence must look within our bruised collective conscience and summon the courage to do so, to do what is necessary to end this inhumanity and pain. It is also what international law demands. Civilians must be protected, and their essential needs must be met, and hostages must be released unconditionally. Arbitrarily detained Palestinians must be freed. Israel must agree to and facilitate humanitarian relief operations, both into and within the Gaza Strip, to reach the population in need. The International Court of Justice's provisional measures in the case on the application of the Genocide Convention in Gaza remain in place including the demand that Israel take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. Life and dignity should be respected for all. International humanitarian law serves as a compass for the conduct in war and is designed to ensure a minimum of humanity. The parties in all states must honor their commitment to this. The suffering must stop. Mr. President, thank you.
I thank Mr. Rajasingham for the information provided. I will now give the floor to the council members who would like to make statements. I give the floor to the delegation of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank ASG Yencha and Mr. Rajasingham for briefing us today. The United Kingdom requested this meeting alongside Denmark, France, Greece and Slovenia in response to the government of Israel's decision to further escalate its military operations in Gaza. As my Prime Minister said, this decision is wrong, and we urge the government of Israel to reconsider immediately. Expanding military operations will do nothing to bring an end to this conflict. It will not secure the release of the hostages. It will only deepen the suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. This is not a path to resolution. It is a path to more bloodshed. President, just this week, the Security Council heard harrowing testimony from Eli David, the brother of Eviatar David, who's been cruelly taken by Hamas on 7 October. He's been held hostage in appalling and inhuman conditions for over 21 months. The Security Council has in its 4 resolutions since 7 October called for the unconditional and immediate release of the hostages. I repeat that call today. We are clear that Hamas must disarm and can play no future part in the governance of Gaza, where the Palestinian Authority must have a central role. But, as many family members of the hostages have warned, this decision by the Israeli government will do nothing to secure the return of the hostages. Instead, it risks further endangering their lives. This escalation will only exacerbate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis, uprooting 1 million more people and forcing them into dangerously overcrowded, unsanitary and undersupplied areas. In Gaza, children and babies are suffering from starvation. Hundreds of civilians have been killed trying to access basic food supplies. This inhumanity cannot be justified. The partial aid access Israel granted in late July has proven woefully inadequate. We have a clear message for Israel. Urgently and permanently lift all restrictions on aid delivery. Yesterday, the UK announced a further $11.4 million for OCHA's Occupied Palestinian Territories Humanitarian Fund. It is vital that the UN and established humanitarian partners can operate safely and at scale, in line with the principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. And Israel must not bar humanitarian NGOs from their essential work through unreasonable and arbitrary registration requirements. All land routes must be opened for essential supplies, including food, baby formula, medicine, shelter, fuel, and clean water. President, a diplomatic solution is possible, but both parties must step away from the path of destruction. We urge the parties to engage in good faith negotiations and to show political will to secure a ceasefire deal and commit to a path to peace. The recent conference on the two-state solution was a powerful demonstration of the international resolve to achieve a brighter future for the region. the UK will continue working with our partners on a long-term plan to secure peace in the region as part of a two-state solution. This is the only way to guarantee Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de... I thank the delegation of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank ASG Genscher and Director Rajasingham for their briefings. Denmark joined France, Greece, Slovenia, and the UK in calling for this urgent meeting. For months, the world has watched in despair as conditions in Gaza have grown more catastrophic by the day. Heartbreaking images and videos of suffering, destruction, and death live-streamed on a daily basis. Instead of heeding our call to immediately end the war in Gaza, Israel has chosen to further escalate its offensive. We condemn the Israeli government's decision to expand the military operation in Gaza. We urge Israel to reverse its decision, which will not secure the release of the hostages nor help end the conflict. It will only cause further bloodshed and deepen the suffering of civilians. We categorically reject any forced displacement. The ICJ's advisory opinion on this matter must be fully respected. Any unilateral attempts to alter the demography or status of the Gaza Strip are unacceptable and constitute a clear violation of international law. Mr. President, civilians in Gaza are starving and face severe limitation in accessing humanitarian aid, aid which Israel is obligated to ensure the population receives. According to OCHA, 1 in 3 people in Gaza has not eaten for days, and over 1,300 of them have been killed while seeking food, most of them young men and boys desperately seeking to feed their families. Today, the entire Strip faces famine-like conditions. This is unconscionable. We deplore the killings of starving civilians trying to get food. The alarming frequency and scale of these incidents are simply unacceptable. We reiterate our call for transparent investigations into these incidents. As we have said many times before, Israel must immediately change course. All restrictions on the delivery of humanitarian aid must be lifted. Civilians, including humanitarian and UN personnel, as well as civilian infrastructure, must be protected in accordance with international law. We must return to the UN-led humanitarian aid system at once. Humanitarian aid must cease to be politicized and used as a political bargaining chip in Gaza. Denmark firmly condemns the heinous terrorist attacks on 7 October 2023 perpetrated by Hamas. There can be no justification for this attack, nor for the continued maltreatment of the remaining hostages. However, Israel's response must be exercised in compliance with international law and with full respect for international humanitarian law. The fight against terrorism cannot come at the expense of the rules that safeguard humanity. To conclude, Mr. President, the violence in Gaza must end. To the parties, we demand a return to a ceasefire, the delivery of humanitarian aid with no restrictions, and the immediate and unconditional release of all the remaining hostages. Denmark will never go back on those principles and will continue to reiterate these demands. We will not tire in our support to the two-state solution, and we will not tire in our commitment to peace in the Middle East. We urge the warring parties to stop burying peace in the rubbles. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Denmark for your statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of France.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I would like to thank you for convening this emergency meeting, which we requested together with our European partners on the Security Council. I also thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Miroslav Jenča, and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham from OCHA for their briefings today. Given the gravity of the most recent announcements by Israel, we needed to raise the alarm. As we said on the 8th of August, France condemns in the strongest possible terms the plan of the Israeli government to expand its military operations to take control of Gaza City with a view to establishing military control over the entirety of the Gaza Strip. France calls upon the Israeli government to reverse that decision. France recalls its firm opposition to any plan for the occupation, annexation and settlement of the Gaza Strip and the forced displacement of its population. Such actions would constitute further violations of international law of an extreme severity that are contrary to the fundamental principles upon which this organization is built and which contradict the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of the 19th of July 2024. They would also represent a threat to regional security and would lead to an absolute impasse. The extension and intensification of Israeli military operations in the most densely populated areas of Gaza would have dramatic humanitarian consequences in Gaza City, but also in the rest of Gaza. Civilians are already living in horrifying conditions. The images of children dying of hunger or civilians being targeted as they try to find food are unbearable. It is essential that Israel comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Announcements and half measures are not good enough. The civilian population and infrastructure must be protected. Israel must urgently open up all crossing points to allow for the immediate, massive, safe, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance across the territory. Israel must allow the United Nations and all humanitarian actors, including international non-governmental organizations, to operate freely and in full security. The implementation of the decision of the Israeli government will in no way contribute to the security of Israel and its nationals, in particular that of the hostages that are still held by Hamas in Gaza. France once again robustly calls upon Hamas to ensure their immediate, unconditional release and to seize upon the ceasefire proposals rather than to, through its obstructionist attitude, to continue the plight of the population of Gaza. France calls for the disarmament of Hamas and for its surrender. Mr. President, the future of the Gaza Strip must be in the context of a future Palestinian state run by the Palestinian Authority. France will continue to mobilize for the implementation of the two-state solution, which is the only solution that can guarantee lasting peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. And we did this at the New York conference that we co-chaired with Saudi Arabia. We call upon all states to join this collective momentum by endorsing the New York Declaration, which proposes concrete measures to preserve the two-state solution and to work towards the stabilization of the Gaza Strip. It also proposes the deployment of a temporary international stabilization mission to ensure the security of Israelis and Palestinians. Mr. President, after 22 months of suffering, the immense pain endured by the population of Gaza and the hostages must end immediately. For that reason, we call upon the government of Israel to reverse its decision to take military control of the Gaza Strip. France reiterates its call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, for the release of the hostages, and for the massive, unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance. Thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación. I thank the delegation of France for this statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for convening this urgent meeting upon the request of the European members of this Council. I also wish to thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Miroslav Jenca and OCHA Director Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham for their briefings. Only days ago, the international community gathered in New York with a clear yet urgent message. The war in Gaza must end, the two-state solution must be realized, Palestinians, Israelis, and all peoples of the region deserve a fair chance at peace. Yet, recent developments seem to have pushed this proposal further out of reach. We condemn Israel's decision to further expand its military operations in Gaza, and we urge Israel to reconsider it. Such actions would endanger the lives of all civilians in Gaza, deepen the humanitarian suffering, and exacerbate the anguish over the fate of the remaining hostages. They would also worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and risk further loss of life and large-scale displacement of Palestinians. We strongly oppose any attempts to forcibly displace the Palestinian population and reiterate that any potential annexation of Gaza or any other part of the occupied Palestinian territories would contravene international law and numerous Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334, would jeopardize regional stability and security and would undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is severe and worsening. Hospitals are overstretched, starvation and malnutrition, especially among children, are worsening, access to clean water remains limited, and civilians risk their lives daily in search of food. We cannot turn a blind eye to this tragedy, nor remain silent while hostages continue to suffer at the hands of Hamas. We call once again for the immediate, unimpeded, and large-scale delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The blockade must be lifted, civilians and humanitarian workers must be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law, and the work of the aid agencies should be facilitated. Greece has taken concrete steps to alleviate suffering in Gaza. Just yesterday, in close cooperation with the European Union and other partners of the region, we conducted an airdrop of food supplies over Gaza. We also stressed the need to fully implement the humanitarian steps agreed upon between Israel and the European Union to improve the situation in Gaza. The expertise of the United Nations systems, particularly UNRWA, is pivotal. In addition, OCHA, as we have just heard again today, has repeatedly expressed its readiness to initiate a UN-coordinated humanitarian plan in the event of a ceasefire or pause in hostilities. We reaffirm our unwavering support for the agency in this regard. Mr. President, Greece's position remains principled and consistent. We have repeatedly condemned the atrocities of October 7. Hamas rule in Gaza must end. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. At the same time, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza must be addressed without delay, and we remain steadfast in our support for the international call to implement the two-state solution. Mr. President, violence in all its forms is never the answer. Dialogue and diplomacy are the only viable path to lasting peace. We therefore call on both parties to agree to an immediate and permanent ceasefire, to secure the release of all hostages, and to advance efforts towards a two-state solution in line with relevant Security Council resolutions, while guaranteeing Israel's right to exist in peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the delegation of Greece for your statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for convening the urgent meeting at the request of the members of the Council, including my own country, Slovenia. We thank Assistant Secretary General Jenča, as well as Director Rajasingham, for their briefings. Mr. President, each time we come to this chamber to discuss the situation in Gaza, we come thinking that we cannot possibly reach new depth. And yet, we convene again today, following the reprehensible announcement by the Israel cabinet that it intends to expand its military campaign and take control of the Strip. A plan of horror and destruction. A new law which Slovenia utterly rejects. A new law which will end in mass civilian casualties and suffering. A new law which will make Israelis less safe in the short and long term. A new law, in spite of continuous appeals from the international community and from the numerous voices from Israel to end the war. Colleagues, Israel's decision directly contradicts the July 2024 advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which declared that Israel must end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. It shows contempt towards the two-state solution, which was resoundingly reinforced by almost the entire international community at a conference held just 2 weeks ago, and which remains the official position of this Council, codified through its resolutions. Slovenia expresses its firm condemnation of this plan, and we call for its immediate reversal. Mr. President, Gaza's death toll is simply staggering. Israel has pursued a deliberate policy of starvation, of manufacturing a famine to pursue political and military gains, in a clear and blatant violation of international humanitarian law. The aerial photos which have emerged of Gaza in recent days show nothing but total destruction, a piece of land reduced to dust. And now we are faced with the prospect of further military escalation, of more violence, of an operation which will undoubtedly wreak havoc on civilians in Gaza and the hostages alike. Obvious questions arise. What will happen to those surviving Palestinians once Israel launches its takeover, particularly the 1 million people living in Gaza City, whose lives already hang in the balance, exhausted by attacks and denied aid? We will not be able to claim that we didn't know. We know that civilians are destined to suffer further mass casualties. We know that they will be displaced once more, chased from corner to tiny camps or even beyond. What will become of the hostages? Just 4 days ago, we heard the heartbreaking testimony of Eli David, brother of Eviatar David, who is still held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. He told us in clear terms that we cannot wait any longer. Who, if not this Council, can stop the killing? Every minute counts for Eviatar. Every minute counts for countless civilians caught in the fire in Gaza. We cannot simply accept a forever war and the continued destruction and traumatization of generations of Palestinians and Israelis. Ambassador Mansour on Tuesday used the words, "We chose peace." The Palestinian Authority has made commitments to comprehensive reforms necessary to govern Gaza and the West Bank. Does the Israeli leadership have the moral clarity to abandon military adventurism and choose peace? Does Hamas have the courage to choose peace, disarm, and to release the hostages immediately and without condition in full dignity? Colleagues, all civilians in Gaza, Israelis and Palestinians, are hostages. Our responsibility to move to protect them against upcoming military onslaught weighs heavy on our shoulders, including as an elected member of this Council. The impunity felt by the occupying power needs to be stopped. We listen and we hear a global cry for the war to stop, for hostages to be freed, for aid to flow in. We need to take action. That's why this council was created, and that's why the Charter provided the council with many tools to maintain peace and security. We stand ready to do whatever it takes to stop the killing and suffering. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the delegation of Algeria.
Mr. President, at the outset, I thank you for the prompt scheduling of this meeting, a meeting requested by almost all members of this council, a meeting born of urgency. We extend our appreciation to ASG Yanka and to Mr. Rajasingham for their sobering briefings on the catastrophic reality in Gaza. Yes, Gaza is facing hell. It is in the hands of an occupying power that threatens the international peace and security. Algeria condemns in the strongest terms the decision of the Israeli cabinet to displace the entire population of Gaza City and northern Gaza, and to impose full military control of the Gaza Strip, as if Gaza was not already under occupation, as if Gaza was not already under inhuman siege. These are war crimes, and those who draw their maps in blood must not walk in the shadow of impunity. Justice must call them by name. There must be accountability. Mr. President, after 22 months of forced displacement, 22 months of starvation, 22 months of ethnic cleansing, such an operation would not merely ruin Gaza. It will just annihilate what remains of it. As if killing more than 62,000 people were not enough. As if killing more than 18,000 children for God's sake, were not enough. As if killing more than 12,000 women were not enough. As if starving to death more than 200 human beings were not enough. The list is too long, too heavy, too dark for this page to hold, and yet, persisting in their genocidal tactics, the Israeli occupying power plan more. Can you imagine what will be left if they execute their plan? Their objective is clear: crystal clear to push an entire people outside their homeland. Palestinians shall have no state, no flag, no future in their land. No Palestinian shall stay from the river to the sea. Yet, they forget. They forget that the land remembers its sons. They forget that olive trees do not surrender to the axe. They grow back from the root. Despite the brutality of the oppression, Palestinians will not abandon their homeland. Palestinians will not let go their rights. We believe in their resilience, as we believe that Gaza, although wounded and bleeding, will one day be clear. The Israeli authorities care nothing for international law. They care nothing for this council. They care nothing for humanity itself. They act with brutality, cruelty, and barbarity, stripping Palestinians of their very essence as human beings, reducing them to something less in their eyes, to human animals. Yes, for them, Palestinians are just human animals. And so, they orchestrate the killing of Palestinians by every instrument. Starvation, thirst, weapons, and humiliation. Humiliation. Mr. President, faced with this genocide, every voice has risen. The International Court of Justice investigates the plausible crime of genocide by the Israeli occupying power. The International Criminal Court pursues those who sign their names in the records of war crimes. The General Assembly condemns repeatedly the occupation and demands its end. The United Nations Human Rights Council counts the wounds and denounces its violation. And yet, in this chamber, the one entrusted with peace and security by the United Nations Charter, sits. The Council sits silent. The Council says nothing. And silence Silence is not neutral. Silence kills. Mr. President, the Security Council must rise to defend the child clutching the last crumb of bread. Rise to shield the mother searching for her sons under rubble. Rise to help the father wounded while seeking help to feed his kids. Rise to break the silence, to break the cycle of impunity. This council must act decisively, resolutely, by resorting to its utmost tools to act under Chapter 7 of the Charter. The hour has come to impose sanctions on the hand that steals the land, on the flag that flaps over ruin. The hour has come to impose sanction on the enemy of humanity. I thank you.
Agradezco. I thank the delegation of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of Somalia.
Mr. President, I thank you for the swift convening of this emergency meeting today. I also express gratitude to Assistant Secretary General Yanka and Mr. Ramesh, Head and Representative of OCHA in Geneva, for their sobering briefing and tireless commitment. In the last 48 hours, Israel's announcement of its intention to impose military control over the entire Gaza Strip is not an abstraction. It's a chilling blueprint for the next chapter of its devastation to come. For the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, this means the escalation of what has already become hell on earth, literally and figuratively, leading to the world's worst man-made famine. It's a death sentence for civilians where over 60,000 Palestinians have been killed since the escalation began, the majority of them women and children. More than 150,000 have been injured, and 90% of Gaza's population are now internally displaced, many living in makeshift shelters without clean water or food. The expanded military assault will make survival impossible for the civilian population. The International Court of Justice, in its recent advisory opinion, reaffirmed the legal obligation of Israel regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. The court was unequivocal. The occupation, the blockade, the denial of humanitarian access, and actions resulting in collective punishment violate international law. The continued targeting of essential services and the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people from their land in Gaza or the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, directly contradicts the principles this Council exists to uphold. We also stress the necessity of preserving the legal and historical status quo at the Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, recognizing the essential role of the Hashemite custodianship in this regard. We are gravely concerned about the recent incidents at Al-Aqsa Mosque and reiterate that any provocation or violation undermines peace and stability and must be unequivocally condemned. Mr. President, we have heard enough talk of security as a pretext for collective punishment. True security cannot be built upon the ruins of justice. There can be no peace while occupation persists, and no real security unless the rights of Palestinians, including the right to self-determination, are recognized and protected. What is needed now is not another brief pause, but an immediate and a permanent ceasefire. Not another limited corridor, but full and unfettered humanitarian access so that food, water, medicine provided by agencies like UNRWA and OCHA can flow freely, not as a charity, but as a matter of right. Not another partial exchange, but the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and detainees so that no one endures inhumane conditions under illegal captivity away from their families and loved ones. Not more negotiations to nowhere, but a genuine commitment to end the occupation and realize the two-state solution this Council and the world have long endorsed. We must not allow the language of military necessity to drown out the cries of the hungry and the displaced. The forced starvation of a population is not an accident of war. It's a crime under international law. The bombardment of neighborhoods and the expulsion of families are not regrettable side effects. They are violations that demand accountability. Mr. President, to conclude, this is not just a test for Israel and Palestine. It's a test for all humanity. Will we stand by, citing complexity and precedent? Or will we act with the urgency and moral clarity that this moment demands? In these darkest moments, it's worth remembering what brought the United Nations into existence in the first place. Our charter opens with a solemn pledge, and I quote, "to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war," end of quote. A promise born from the ashes of World War II, when the world vowed never again. Yet, 8 decades later, we are confronted once more with the images and the realities of children buried beneath rubble, starvation used as a weapon, families uprooted, and entire communities erased. If we cannot act now to uphold this promise in Gaza, we must ask ourselves, what then is the purpose of this Council? What, in truth, remains of our solemn oath to future generations? Let the response not be graveyard silence. And silence in moments like these is not neutrality. For all the victims, it is a verdict. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco. I thank the delegation of Somalia for their statement. I give the floor to the delegation of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you. Mr. President, for convening this meeting in a timely manner. I would also like to thank ASG Incha and Mr. Rajasingham for their concise and powerful briefings. The Republic of Korea is gravely concerned by the Israeli Security Cabinet's recent approval to expand the war in Gaza and occupy Gaza City, as this plan entails significant and multifaceted risks. We urge Israel to retract this plan. In this context, I would like to address each risk in turn. First, the plan, if implemented, will devastate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Daily images of starving Palestinian children and aerial scenes of Gaza's near total destruction demands our attention to focus on alleviating the dire humanitarian needs. However, the proposed military escalation will only deepen the extended suffering of an exhausted, sick, and hungry population. Not deliver the humanitarian relief they so clearly need, and that the international community is urgently calling for. The proposed plan's primary target, Gaza City, is one of the few remaining areas where a large civilian population has sought tenuous refuge. And a renewed full-scale operation against it will inevitably cause another round of forced displacement and killings. With much of Gaza already declared a buffer zone or under evacuation orders, and its borders largely sealed, displaced civilians lack shelter or safe zones, raising fears of mass expulsion or so-called voluntary migration, which is not in itself voluntary. Second, this plan entails a grave risk to the lives of the hostages. This council, including my country, has spoken with one voice in calling for their immediate and unconditional release. Yet, the announced plan, if implemented, will expose them to intensified hostilities and undermine diplomatic efforts toward their freedom. While Israel claims that it will push for the release of the hostages through decisive military victory, such an outcome could make it more difficult to bring the hostages home, a concern voiced by their families. Hamas' explicit warning that any further military expansion could risk the hostage, which the Republic of Korea resolutely condemns, adds further weight to this concern.
And we were just watching the rare weekend Security Council session. Basically, all statements agreed on several points. End of the unlawful occupation of Israel and the full and immediate ceasefire of to be total and complete, and the detainees to be released. Israel must act according to international law, and humanitarian aid should be there for all people. Also adding the right to the Palestinians for self-determination and the right for a state, and also the humanitarian and security steps to be implemented and the two-state solution to take place. Also mentioning, of course, the humanitarian catastrophe that should end instantly, and the disarmament of Hamas, and that Gaza lies in ruins. Severe concerns also were mentioned of Israel's expansion to seize the Gaza Strip, and states need to end this inhumanity, and relief operations have to be allowed in, and restrictions should be lifted on all aid and distribution assistance. So as the Security Council session continues, the chamber reverberated with urgency and moral clarity from the United Nations' highest humanitarian voices to European capitals. The chorus was united. Gaza is bleeding and the world cannot look away. And one after another, delegates denounced Israel's decision to expand the military operations, warning it would deepen a catastrophe already defined by mass displacement, starvation, and the collapse of the health system. And they called out the targeting of civilians and aid seekers, condemned the forced displacement of Palestinians, and demanded that every crossing to be opened for safe, unhindered humanitarian relief. And beyond the statistics, tens of thousands killed, thousands of children dead from bombs or hunger, speakers painted the human reality. Families surviving without food for days, and the sick and injured dying for the lack of medicine, and entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Above all, they insisted that Gaza must remain an integral part of a sovereign Palestinian state, and that only an end to occupation and a political settlement based on the two-state solution can deliver the lasting peace. And what we heard today was not just the diplomatic language, it was a moral reckoning. And the pleas were for action, no delay, and for humanity over politics, for an immediate halt to a war that has already stolen so many lives. And the world's credibility, the very principles of the United Nations were built upon, are now on trial. Will these calls for justice, protection, and self-determination for the Palestinian people be met with resolve, or will they fade into yet another chapter of broken promises? And the answer will decide Gaza's survival, and history will remember who stood up when it mattered most. Thank you very much.